Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, and I've been saying for ages this is a mod pack with 20 plus planets, and so it's about time we went off to have a look at another one of them. Granted you can see Norvis in the background, but this is Safir's longer range spaceship that's designed to go into Planetary and head off over to Vulcanus and investigate what's going on over there. So it's going to take him over, it's going to take him there with a load of useful stuff and allow him to sort of get things set up and start exploring that planet. Safir hasn't played Space Age before, so this was his first ever spaceship. So there's a lot of new design things to learn, involving things like the grabometrons, how to build things in space, the spaceship platform hubs and cargo bays, and just how things work. So all sort of stuff like just dropping stuff in and having the ship automatically build it, not being able to run around on it as you normally can, working out things like fuel and how to defend the ship with turrets at the front of it and maybe even down the side of it. All of these sort of things, he had to work out a lot of this from scratch. And then just to make that even more exciting, well, because of the whole lignumis situation we've got going on, he's also needing to worry about making wood in order to make the wooden ammunition, in order to make the normal yellow ammunition, in order to then defend the ship. And that's why this ship is quite a lot bigger than your average My First spaceship. I mean, okay, this isn't our first spaceship in the game. We've also got the ones that go between Norvis and its moons, where they don't need any sort of defences, so they are just storage space and fuel production and thrusters. So they're very, very easy. But no, the Safir's one actually has to be able to defend itself as well, which makes it a little bit more interesting. I do like the sort of the shape and the design and the layout of the ship. One of the things he's done that I think is really cool is down here he's got all the engines in a diagonal line like this, meaning that the oxidizer can be fed straight through all the diagonals all the way down here like that, with the fuel coming along a pipe along the outside. And that makes it look a lot neater and a lot easier to plug together than the design I've gone for on the Bagel here, where I've got sort of the zigzag line, which means I then need to finagle in some pipes along the top. So I think that's a good design, and I might have to start copying it in the future. Of course, it would be a lot easier if you could just pick up one of these thrusters and then rotate it, but no, they can't be flipped, so that's a bit of a shame. But then I guess that would make it too easy, because then you just be able to put them all on a long line, all linked together, and then feed in the fuel and the oxidizer, either one at each end or both of them at one end, and feed it along, and it'd be far too easy, so I guess that's why they've not allowed that. And so yes, as explained, there are a couple of new difficulties introduced by the mod set we're playing. So for example, when you do crushing, all of these space crushers have an innate quality score, so they've all got a plus 12.5% on the quality, and that means there's a reasonably high chance that stuff is going to be exported at a slightly higher than normal quality level. So you can see there's some quality 2 ice coming out here, there's a little bit of there's quality 2 carbon in the middle there, and he's dealing with that by having it being filtered out by these splitters over here, where we're sending just the basic stuff out one way, and then anything that's a bit more fancy can come down here and it will go into this quality down binner. And I'm very, very glad we've got this mod for these sort of reasons, and that means we can then have those passed out, and they can then be downgraded to a sensible level, or just disposed of if they're things we don't actually want, and then pass through here to be used nonetheless, even though the higher quality stuff will come out. And it would be fairly easy to deal with this by just throwing any quality stuff overboard and letting it just drift on past down here, like it's got happening with all the bits and pieces that aren't needed, like stone and coal. And then they could just be chucked off into space by these inserters, as you do with anything that you don't want. But it's slightly nicer to be able to hang on to that extra 12.5% of the stuff that's coming out, and then be able to actually use it rather than just throwing it away. Speaking of quality, down on Norvis, the system that's producing all of our everything has got quality modules in it, and so we've managed to get a number of higher quality solar panels up here, for example, and a high quality grabometron as well. And the higher quality grabbers are excellent because they have more grabber arms that can come out of them. So it's not particularly noticeable here because they're only grabbing one thing at a time, because we're in orbit around Norvis and there aren't that many rocks. But when we start to fly out a bit further, a quality 2 grabber will have 2 arms going out, and they've also got a bigger grabbing area as well, which again you can kind of see when we look at the boxes like this, but isn't very obvious. Also, there's Maluna, lovely. And so the ship works in the fairly standard way of grabbing in the chunks that are required. So we're reading the amount on the belt, and we've got the amount we want to have in a combinator here, but instead of doing it the way I've done it, which is where you multiply all of the things on the belt by -1 and then add it to the amount in the combinator, Safir has done it a different way, which is quite interesting. He's used a decider combinator, and he said for each thing on the red channel and each thing on the green channel, if the red channel is less than the green channel, then output 1 of that thing. So it's then monitoring along here, watching the input signals, and if there's fewer on the red channel, that is reading off the belt, than there is on the green channel, that is the combinator, then it'll output it. And so you can see over here that we've got less carbon here than we have here, but we've got more metallic than we have there, and so we're only outputting the carbon and, okay, the oxide as well. And that's working, yeah, that's working really nicely. That's a very different way of doing it to the way I've wired my ships up, but, you know, it works perfectly well. It's just an alternative, so yeah, I like that. It's good. And then on the other side of the belt, as is standard, he's got the ammunition running around here, because if you're going to have a belt running all the way around the perimeter for all the grabbers, and you need a belt running all the way around the perimeter for the turrets, well, you've got two sides of the belt. You might as well use both of them, so that's exactly what he's done. That's, again, reasonably standard. And then the ice is being melted into water by these chemical plants, and then the iron ore and the carbon are being passed down here to be made into fuel and oxidizer, which are then being just chucked into pipes. So we've got two parallel pipes coming along here. They're feeding down into the engines, keeping everything running. He has noted that one thing that's perhaps an oversight on this ship is that there are no tanks for storing the fuel or the oxidizer, and so that means that well, there's no stockpile of it, and also he hasn't been able to stick in pumps to control the amount of flow through, so the ship only has one speed, and that is full steam ahead until it runs out of fuel, at which point it is no steam ahead. So it's a very binary thrust options going on here. There's no control, but generally you don't need a great deal of control on the local ships that are just buzzing around in the local area where it's not too scary. One quite notable thing that is a bit different that we can do in this mod pack is, because crushing the metallic asteroids produces stone, as well as the iron ore and the occasional metallic asteroid chunk that needs to be passed back out again, that means there's stone available on this ship which can come around here. It can go into this machine to be cooked into bricks, and then into here to be made into walls. And so this ship can have a steady supply of walls being produced, which means you can have a wall across the front up here, protecting all of your turrets. Sadly, you can't protect the grabbers because that stops the grabbers working, but you can protect all of the turrets. And therefore this ship should do a lot better against larger asteroids that are trying to do it some damage, because if a piece of wall does get destroyed, it can be immediately replaced from the stockpile in here, and he can stockpile basically as much as he wants. He's got it up to 100 at the moment, but he could stockpile any amount of it, and then the wall replacements could happen really quickly, which apparently is also required on Norvis because we're losing a load of walls down there, but I don't think I care about that at the moment. The other big difference, which I mentioned earlier, is that we're having to produce wood up here, and he's using this recipe with wood astroponics, where you take in a tree seed and a liquid fertilizer, and that produces some wooden bioslurry. Okay, so let's work out what he's doing with that. Well, the bioslurry is coming into here and is being mixed with water and carbon and turned into more liquid fertilizer. And if we look at the numbers over here, you can see that we output half the amount of bioslurry as the liquid fertilizer put in, and then this recipe produces twice as much liquid fertilizer as it takes in bioslurry because it compensates with the amount of water. And so that is actually a nice self-contained recipe. You're effectively turning carbon and water into wood, which sounds fair enough, makes a lot of sense, using the bioslurry liquid fertilizer loop as a sort of as a catalyst. So it makes things a little bit more complicated. It means you need some extra machines in there, but it means that once you've got it kick-started and working, you don't need to produce any extra bioslurry or liquid fertilizer to keep it running. Safir has mentioned that he needed to do a starter culture to bootstrap it, which uses this recipe, bringing in carbon, sulfuric acid and water in a chemical plant to make some liquid fertilizer. This can be shipped around in barrels, as you can see here, but since it can only be made in, well, space or space-like environments, should we say, Safir had to ship the acid up in barrels instead, and then make the required amount to keep the loop running up on the spaceship. He has, of course, since removed the machines that were doing that, because once you've made enough, it can just carry on working all by itself, but he did have a chemical plant in here to make that initial bootstrap amount of catalyst. In the future, I guess we'll probably be able to do this whole thing from space-based resources, but since it doesn't get used up, that's not really going to be a huge bonus. It's not going to make an enormous difference whether you have to ship up a couple of barrels of sulfuric acid or not. If we had a mod to transfer things around from ship to ship, then it could be interesting having perhaps a single ship that is just sitting there making fertilizer from acid, and then passing it over to the ships that need it to start growing trees. But again, not really all that worthwhile, given that it's just a single chemical plant using other ingredients we already have. And then, yeah, so we've got the seeds being fed in off the belts here, the wood being fed out, and if we look down at the bottom here, we've got machines turning wood into seeds and then unloading to make sure there's a certain amount on the belt. We're always trying to have at least 300, and so more seeds can be fed out if there's under 300, but there's no need to actually completely fill the belt up. The wood can be tapped off over here to go straight into the assembly machines to make the wooden ammunition, which can then go straight into these assembly machines to make the yellow ammunition, which is coming from the iron feed that comes, unsurprisingly, from dealing with the metallic asteroid chunks up here, so that's lovely. We've got one belt here feeding both of those, and then that can just feed out as much iron as we need for making the ammunition all the way down here. As the iron plates actually come out of the furnaces down the side here, we can see the first time when having the hot plates mod has actually made any real difference to one of our builds. So you can see here, we're getting the hot plates coming out of the furnaces, they're coming down here, and then they haven't necessarily cooled off enough by the time they get down to the bottom here. So there's a splitter here with a filter on it that sends only the cool iron around down here to be made into ammunition. Anything hot gets passed around up here to go all the way around this loop and then come back down again, which gives it plenty of time to cool before it then gets to this splitter again and then can be sent on down here. Now, having the splitter here isn't essential. We could have just had the loop anyway and just accept that all of the metal is going to go all the way up and all the way back down again. But having the splitter in down here it saves a little bit of time, I guess, when you're first initializing the system. And this is interesting, as I say, because every other time where the hot metals mod has come into play, it's been something like this, where we've had a massive furnace set up, and then yes, there is some hot metal coming out over here. It is all hot when it comes out of the furnaces, but as it flows down these belts here, it all has a chance to cool down. And because we've got a slightly limited amount of loading going on down here at the bottom, it's all cooled down well before it gets down to the bottom. And even in the cases where it doesn't, it cools down quickly in the chests anyway, so it doesn't really affect the game all that much. But on the spaceship, because the whole thing is so much more compact, we're seeing some of the hot metal having to go around to give it a little bit of a chance to cool off and be ready to use. So, that's quite interesting, and it's nice to see that mod actually having an effect. But then that can build the yellow ammunition, which is going through a little bit of spaghetti down here, and then coming around a belt there to go, and as we said, to feed the turrets. So yeah, I'd say that's working very, very nicely. I'm sort of entertained to note that Safir is still at the trying to make ships as compact and tight and spaghetti as possible phase of play. And I definitely went through that one myself, and eventually towards the end of my Space Age run, I think my very final spaceship that I made, I'd sort of got over that a little bit, and I just made it big to make the construction easier. And I think when he was building this, we were very, very short of resources down on Norvis, so it's probably a good thing that he made it as small as possible, so as to not use up too much of the scaffolding. And it means it'll run a bit faster as well, which is nice. Safir would also like it to be known that he's named the ship the Richard Dean Anderson as a Stargate reference, so yes, good, thank you for that. In order to fly out to Vulcanus, you need a certain amount of ammunition stockpiled on the ship to make sure it can get there safely. And Safir has reckoned that 500 on the belt is enough for that. And so he's done a nice simple thing inside the Space Platform Hub of checking the circuit conditions, which is what monitoring this belt around the outside. If there's over 500 ammunition, then the ship is going to be happy to leave. He's also put in some other ones to make it manually controlled for the time being. But at the moment, we've got 500 ammo, so let's head over to Vulcanus and see how things go. So goodbye to Norvis, and off we go into deep space. A few megameters into the trip and we start to get the large asteroids, and the gun turrets have something to do. And now you can see the higher quality grabometrons with their multiple arms going out and picking up all the bits and pieces that are being generated as we fly out. And this is working nicely. There's loads and loads of resources available in space out here. So in fact, the grabometrons have gone to sleep because we've got enough on the belt now. We're picking stuff up faster than we're using it. Although, of course, now we're going to have to start making ammunition once again because we're using some of it up. So eventually, the turrets will be reloaded. We'll get ammunition gaps in the ammunition belt coming around here and have to chuck a bit more in out of the belt from the inserters here. We can also see the glory that is the disco thrusters down here with in all their colourful wonder. And yes, the ship can happily buzz its way over towards Vulcanus. One of the things that's a little bit of a risk and a potential problem for this ship, and actually ships in general, is that over near Vulcanus there's very few of these oxide asteroids, and that means it can be quite difficult to get in the ice that's needed to make the water, that's needed to make the fuel and the trees and the so on and so forth. Because Vulcanus still has the medium asteroids drifting around its orbit, you can't really leave this ship there forever because it churns through a certain amount of water in order to make the wood for the ammunition. Now, in vanilla Space Age, it's quite safe to leave a ship in orbit around Vulcanus because the only thing you need to bring in to keep a ship being able to defend itself is metallic asteroids in order to make the... Oh, there we go, sudden Vulcanus jump scare. Is the metallic asteroids in order to make the ammunition, because all you need is iron at that point. So a ship could just be left here forever. But, despite the fact that we can see a few at the moment, there are very few oxide asteroids in orbit around this planet, so you're not going to see all that many of them. And so there is a risk of working through all of the water and then therefore running out of wood and therefore running out of ammunition. And so we may end up, once we start having ships doing this run in an automated way, we might start having to put in limits on how long they're allowed to sit over Vulcanus. So hopefully in here there is a wait condition for time. Yes, there's a time passed down here, so we could set this to 20 minutes or something like that to make sure that if the ship does sit here, it's not going to run out of water and therefore ammunition, because that could be a serious problem for the ship. Now, if we take a look in the Factoriopedia, we see that in theory you can get medium oxide asteroids and oxide asteroid chunks here, but if I go over to the route from Norvis to Vulcanus, you can see that the medium oxide asteroids, that's the pink line at the bottom there, falls off to very, very close to zero. So I think there's a good chance that we're going to struggle. And the oxide asteroid chunks appear that maybe they do actually fall off to zero. It's kind of hard to tell on the graph, really. But the numbers are going to be quite small in orbit around here. And you can see if we take a look outside, there are now that we've sort of cleared out the ones that were visible due to having just arrived, there are one or two actually. There's one over there, and I think I saw one down here. So there are a few oxide asteroid chunks, but they are quite rare, and so there is a certain level of risk here if we just leave a ship in orbit. Now, this is something that might be worth doing, possibly between streams, to see how long the ship will last for. But it's going to be could be a little bit dangerous. And so, as you've seen, this is a nice ship for doing the Vulcanus run, or at least for doing the run of taking Safir and all of his gear, all the stuff he thinks he's going to need for going to Vulcanus, over to Vulcanus itself. This feels like a good point to end the video, and also a great point for Series 2 to start. We finally escaped from Norvis's sphere of influence, so come back next week to see a summary of everything that we've done so far, and then we'll take a look into our first steps on Vulcanus, breaking ground and investigating the fauna. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. New videos will be coming out every Thursday and Friday for the foreseeable future, and we'll be streaming more Factorio Planetary Pioneers on Monday, 7:30 PM UK time as usual, and I'll of course be back for some more Foundry on Wednesday as well, which is like Factorio but with a third dimension, so I'm enjoying that one. There's a sort of space travel, well, there's not so much space travel as just a space marketplace in that game. So I don't build my own spaceships, but I do get to send them off to go and sell things for me. And so I think that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.